Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon breakout sessions for today's Synergy event. Trust everyone's feeling nourished and refreshed after a long networking lunch, albeit a very quick hour it seemed to be. Events team deliberately fed us full of low GI food, and that's really to continue the insights, education and learning for the rest of the afternoon. So you are in for a jam-packed afternoon. There's some really good sessions, and whether you're involved in, or you will be involved in 2 of the 3 sessions, but you'll thoroughly enjoy it and get a lot out of it. As both Gin and Andrew alluded to this morning, this is unique to Suncorp. It's the first time we or anyone else has opened their doors to a broad range of intermediaries across different industries. So whether you're a insurance broker, mortgage broker or financial advisor, I'm sure you've got a lot out of today so far. So the learning shall continue. I'm here today to introduce Stuart Elliott. Stuart is currently the Executive Manager for Workforce Strategy and Design for the Suncorp Group. This role looks at the issues related to building the workforce of the future, from strategic planning and organisational design through to how we source the best capability in the future of work. Stuart has been in the finance industry for 25 years and has had both business and human resources roles at a general management level. Stuart started working in business banking and has had roles in HR, change management, institutional banking and strategic management. Outside of work, Stuart is married to Sandra and has 2 daughters, Jordan 14 and Lara 12. He enjoys a range of sports, golf, football and tennis, all close to my heart, reading, music, good food and great wine. Stuart has a Bachelor of Economics and a postgraduate studies in leadership, change management, human resources and education. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Stuart to the stage for the Workforce Trends of the Future session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. As introduced, my role is Executive Manager, Workforce Strategy and Design. It doesn't mean much, but my role is to understand what's happening in the world, especially in the world of work, to try and look at strategies for Suncorp to take advantage of the opportunities and to mitigate the threats. And I want you to keep those 2 terms in your mind as we go through the next 4 trends that we're going to look like. What are the threats and what are the opportunities? And in saying that, it's important to draw a distinction between looking at trends and making predictions. In Back to the Future 2, Robert Zemeckis predicted that by 2015 we would be flying in cars, we would be rehydrating our food, and we would be using hoverboards. But if you look carefully, we are still using corner payphones. So one of the big trends, or one of the big things that we do when we do predictions, is we miss some of the real easy ones and we make predictions about things that are inaccurate. Either way, predictions make us look foolish. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at trends. And the reason we look at trends is that there's a really great quote by a guy by the name of James Wallman that says, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." Which means what we need to do is look at things that are happening already and start to say, if we stretched that out a bit further, what might it look like for us? So over the next hour or so, a bit less, we're going to look at 4 things that are happening. And we're going to examine what's going on, what's beneath it, and what are the implications if this keeps going. The first one is this idea from moving from pipes to platforms. So I'm going to start with a bit of a question. Hands up in the last 3 months if you've used any of these services. Uber, Airbnb, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Netflix, Tinder. Oh, gee, those hands went down there, didn't they? So what do they have in common? So essentially what they have in common is that they're all platform businesses. So what is a platform business? But before we get into that, I want you to have a look at some things that have happened in the last sort of 10 years that might explain something. Let's have a look at this. This is the top 5 publicly listed companies in the world by market capitalisation. Have a look at 2006. Now, before 2006, there wasn't a tech company in there. It was dominated by oil, retail, finance, consulting. In 2006, Microsoft comes into the picture. By 2011, on the back of the first lot of iPhones, Apple's now right up there. Then look what's happened between 2011 and 2016. Our top 5 publicly listed companies in the world are all tech companies. Why? Well, largely because we have changed the way in which we personally do business. And one of the things about trends is that quite often we think someone else is driving this, but it's us. We have chosen to do a lot of the way in which we transact through these devices, through tablets, through phones, through laptops. Who here has bought something recently online? Who here hasn't bought something ever online? One person. We'll talk about your issues later. But this is what's happening. We're actually driving this change. And these tablets and phones and laptops have created an opportunity for something unique, and that is the platform business. So how does a platform business work? Well, I'm going to start with an example. Marriott Hotels. Marriott Hotels operates in 120 countries worldwide. They have 1.2 million rooms available at the moment on the back of 3,700 properties. So remember that, 1.2 million rooms, 3,700 properties, 120 countries. Airbnb have 1.6 million rooms in 191 countries on the back of 0 properties. And that's the difference. A pipeline business bases its whole business model on creating value by leveraging its own assets. It takes what it has and says, how can I add value with my assets? A platform business creates value by organising a relationship between someone that has an asset and someone who wants to use it. This idea of sitting there and saying, all I want to do is connect. So a platform business connects. And Airbnb, while being a good example, is not the only example. And there's a few up there. Uber. Who's used Uber? I saw a few people saying, put up their hand using Uber. Right, so tell me why. Cheap, quick, convenient. Online. Do you ring to book one? Can you see when your Uber's how close it is? Do you know who you're going to get? You know their rating. By the way, they know your rating. Has anyone here as a passenger got less than a 4 as a rating? Because you're not going to get picked up if you've got less than a 4. Always worries me when I see Uber drivers and they've got a 4.5 and I'm thinking, what have they done wrong? And then I get in one and then I work out why. But it's also increasingly, what are the other things that are coming? Who here has booked a holiday with with a travel agent recently? 2, 3, 4. Who here has gone online and looked at something like hotels.com or Trivago or... See, we're making the decisions. And it's not just around things like that. Who in the last 3 months has bought a CD? One person. One person. Okay, one person. We'll talk about that as well. Who in the last 3 months has paid for an individual song or an individual album? We've got a couple more. Who here has a Spotify account? Who here has a Pandora account? Sorry. Yeah. Not anymore. And that's what else happens in these platform businesses, that they start to self-select. So how do they self-select? And this is how a platform business works. The platform business creates a market in which both the supplier and the consumer need that platform. So if I want to put a room in my house and make it available to someone, why would I go to Airbnb? I'd go to Airbnb because they have over 4 million individual users each month. That's why I do it as a supplier. As a consumer, why do I go to Airbnb? Because it's got 1.6 million rooms available. And what happens is it creates this virtuous cycle. The more rooms, the more customers. The more customers, the more people will go into that. That platform is now required by both parties. How do you create that virtuous cycle where you sit in the middle and create this demand from both parties? And that's what's unique about platform businesses. And the reason that Pandora went out of business is because a lot of the major recording companies had decided that they needed to work out where they were going to go. And they chose Spotify or they chose Apple Music. So with Apple Music starting to go into the platform, it basically meant it was going to work out that way. It's probably got a bit further to go as well. There are still a number of other platforms in that area. What about television? Who here only watches free-to-air television? 3 people. Who here binge watches on something like Netflix or... Yeah, we've even changed the way we watch TV. We don't wait a week for the next program. We'd actually prefer to wait until that whole season is finished and then watch the whole season in one weekend or in a couple of weekends. It's crazy, and that's what's changing, and that's what's actually making this shift. So that if you have now moved to this binge-watching way of watching television, it means anything that actually requires you to wait is going to be yesterday's news. It's an obsolete platform if it requires you to wait. What else? What else are we going to see? So anything with the word agent out of it, I think, is an opportunity for some sort of platform business. Travel agent, real estate agent. So the big things at the moment is people actually going in and starting to look at how they can sell their house without going to the real estate agent down the road. News agents, who has the newspaper on their tablet, phone, or gets news alerts whenever things happen. Who here waits and gets a newspaper, actually a hard copy paper in the morning? So, 4 guys there over 50. We'll talk about, no, I'm picking on you, we'll talk about the demographics in a minute. But this is what's going on, and this is why this idea of pipelines to platforms is one of these trends that we need to be aware of. Because at some point, we're going to need to work out where in that we sit. Are we a supplier? Are we part of the platform? Or are we at the application layer at the end? So what is it for us in businesses? Where are the threats and opportunities? Where are the threats and opportunities for our customers? Where are the threats and opportunities for our clients and our partners? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes at your tables to have a quick discussion about this. And we're going to do this after each of the trends, but it's only going to be 2 minutes or so. But just quickly, what are the threats and opportunities that exist in this trend of moving from pipeline to platform? Take 2 minutes. Again, lots of interesting thinking. And if we're going to be working in different ways, and if we're going to be working for different sorts of organisations, we're also going to be working for a lot longer. In the introduction, Michael said that I have 2 daughters. They are 14 and 12. Who else in the room has kids born after 2000? The vast majority. So the Future of Work Institute says this: based upon the current progression of actuarial tables in terms of longevity, for kids born after 2000, they have a better than 50% chance of living beyond 100. For kids born after 2000, they have a better than 50% chance of living beyond 100, and in Australia that number is closer to 105. So that if you've got kids born after 2000, they have a better than 1 in 2 chance of living to 105. But this is just part of a phenomenal shift that's happening that's based upon the fact that we're living longer, we're living healthier lives, and we're already starting to see some of that in our workplaces. So by 2020, we will have 5 generations in the workplace. We're already starting to see it. At Suncorp, our youngest is a 16-year-old. Our oldest is a 78-year-old. So we've got a 62-year span in the workplace. And that creates some challenges in and of itself. So, the amount of new technology we bring into the workplace every year is phenomenal. How do you think these guys, traditionalists and boomers, deal with this constant upgrade of technology? It would be nice if that was how it worked where I work. And these are generalisations, so remember that it's not, not everyone. The flip side of that is, how do you think these guys would feel if you didn't change technology regularly? Frustrated. My kids would not be able to cope if they weren't getting upgrades and new things. And that's what we talk about in terms of digital natives are those that have grown up thinking that that's the way the world always has been. So my kids like to ask me, Dad, when you were a kid, what sort of mobile phone did you have? When I was a kid, I had one which was, it was like on the wall and had a really long cord. You could take it into the lounge room. A really windy cord. The first mobile, I actually was in business banking when the first lot of mobile phones came in, and I remember lending. They were about $15,000 each. And this was the big Motorola's with the little pack that came with it. Yep. And so when my kids say, what sort of mobile phone did you have when you were a kid? Because they actually don't see a world before this ubiquity of the internet and technology and things like that. So that's what we're getting into the workforce today. They don't understand, how we could have legacy systems. For some of the people at this end, traditionalists and boomers, they're still coping with the upgrade we did to the Hogan system in 1984. And that's how we're having to manage this change and manage this sort of diversity. So how do we do that? And that's, really that's just the tip of the iceberg, because this is going to get more and more. As we live longer and as we start to live healthier lives and are in the workplace for longer, it's going to create more issues for us. But it's all part of something else. So Bernard Salt has talked about the fact that the way we live our lives has changed profoundly. He says that in 1933, life was like this. We were a child until we were 13. And then we were an adult. And we were an adult till we were about 52. And then we were old. We were old until we were about 63, and then we were dead. Now, I hate to break it to you, but all my scenarios end the same. The storyline changes a bit. So by 1973, a couple of things had happened. So you're still a child until you're about 12, but during the 60s, we developed this terminology called a teenager. And you're a teen now from 13 to 19. You're then an adult from about 19 through to about 62. And then you're old. You're now old until you're 73. Wind forward to 2013. So go forward another 40 years, and we have a really, really different way in which we live our lives. So you're a child from 0 to 12 as well. But then, nowadays, Bernard Salt says that you're an adolescent from 13 to 29. So why does he say 29? He says that most kids are still heavily dependent upon the family until they leave home and buy another property or until they get married. And he talks about this idea of these rubber band kids. They leave, but they just keep pulling back. They try and go out and back to mum and dad for a couple of days. Or they're dropping off washing, or they're getting meals regularly. And so there is this level of dependence. And he says that this is adolescence in its new form. So from 13 through to 29, we have adolescence. And that you don't actually separate now till 30. And so you're an adult, really, from 30 till your early 50s. And now in your early 50s, we have another thing, and it's called lifestyle. So now, you're in your 50s, you've accumulated a bit of wealth, and you've decided that you no longer work for the man. Don't want to do that. But what I will do is I'll work part-time, or I might take a few months off. I might buy myself a caravan. I might go on a cruise or a couple of cruises, because I want to change the balance of the way I live my life. I've worked pretty hard now, and I want to do something different. And this period of lifestyle is increasingly something that we're having to, we see it all the time. And that continues now until you're in your 60s, about 64. You're retired now from 65 to 74, and then you're old. And you're old until you're in your mid-80s, which at the moment is about the life expectancy. So this picture of how we live our lives now is profoundly different from how we lived in 1933 and even from how we lived in 1973. How different will it be for our kids? The work that's been done by the Future of Work Institute says that if kids are living to 105, the model of education, work, retirement cannot stack up. Because if you're going to live to 105 and you want to retire at, say, 70, you've got to now fund 35 years of retirement on the back of about 50 years of work. The amount you would have to put away every year from the first year of work to fund a 35-year retirement is significant. And if we think that governments are going to be able to pay our children to retire with a pension that is enough for them to live on, so what might shift? Well, one of the things that has started to creep in is this idea of first education, first period of employment, first period of lifestyle, second period of education, second period of employment. And that it may be that life doesn't look as linear as it used to. And that would be consistent with how our kids experience technology. It would be consistent with how we're starting to consume media. That it's not linear, it is about looking at the mix of education, work, and lifestyle as interchangeable through our lives. And that we may have a first job, we may then relearn to do something different. Or, more importantly, we may see learning as something that is continuous and ongoing and stops us thinking about education as something that stopped when we completed high school, matriculated, and then did our degree. The pressure we put on kids to work out what they want to do by the time they're 18, when they're going to have to do it for the next 60 years, 70 years, potentially 75, 80 years, it's ridiculous. The one thing we need to think about for our kids is helping them think of education as something that they're going to be doing all their lives. As an employer, I'm not going to want to hire someone who's in their 60s if the degree they got when they were in their 20s. But what I am going to want to do is have someone who has displayed this ongoing capacity to learn, to self-educate. Not necessarily with formal qualifications, but this idea of keeping up with how things are moving. So if there's one thing we can help our kids do, it's start to love learning, because they're going to have to be doing it a lot. The other thing we're going to have to do is to think about what are the implications for the way in which we plan for our lives. What are the implications for how we think about retirement? Do we have a pretty solid view of retirement at the moment, which is that we work and we work and we work and then we retire and we've got whatever we've got left over? And is that going to work? So again, in a couple of minutes, I want you to start thinking about for yourselves, for your kids, for your clients and customers, the products and services that you provide, are they going to satisfy a completely different way of living our lives? What are the threats? What are the opportunities? Take a couple of minutes. That's a couple of minutes, and what I want you to do is keep thinking about these things, not just at this session, but keep thinking about these things as you move through and as you go back to work. But if it's all about work changing or organised changing from pipelines to platforms, that's also going to have a profound shift on the way in which we work and the sorts of way in which organisations look like. Who has an iPhone? Does anyone not have an iPhone in the room? That's you. What have you got, a Samsung?
Yeah.
Fine.
But if you were in Asia, it'd be the complete opposite of what you just said. There'd be few people with an iPhone, and it'd be all Samsung. Singapore, for example.
Okay, so here's a good question. Who makes the iPhone? Incorrect. So Apple is made by Hon Hai Precision Industries in Shenzhen, and they're better known as Foxconn. And in creating the iPhone, that they have more than 100 suppliers. There is one supplier that basically supplies 27% by value of the iPhone 7. Who do you think it might be? Samsung. So Samsung basically supply 27% of the iPhone, and they are one of 100 different organisations. So here's a question. Why would Apple have as its major supplier for the iPhone, its signature product, its major competitor? Because it makes the best screens. Because they don't care. So Samsung make the processors, they make the display. They don't actually make the glass screen. The glass screen is made by Corning, so Gorilla Glass. And Corning, by the way, make the screens or the glass for something like 98% of all smartphones. But it's this idea of, I don't care who it is. I'm no longer thinking about people as competitors. I'm thinking about who I need to have in my supply chain to create the device that I have promised to my customers, to meet my customer expectations. So it is this idea of breaking down old thinking that says, okay, well, they're my competitors, so I need to stick over here, so I'll find people here that don't work with them. And if the reason I say this is that we've had this idea in the world of work that we have our team, and our team competes against their team. And to some extent, that's what's starting to be broken down. This idea of the green team and the red team and the purple team is starting to look a lot more like this. We have a product to develop, or we have a service to provide, and I need to work out who I need in the room to deliver that service or that product. And I'm not interested in, or I'm less interested in where they used to work, or if they worked with a competitor, or whether they're going to go and give stuff to competitors, or even if they're currently doing work for a competitor, because they're the person who's best able to supply the skills and capabilities I need today. So why do I have a photo of Iron Man on the screen? No takers? Iron Man 3 holds a world record. It has the world record for the most number of people involved in making a movie. 3,310 people are on the credits of Iron Man 3. 3,310. And the reason I've got that there is that we're increasingly seeing the world of work resemble the way that we've always made movies. That is, we bring a group of people together for a specific period of time to create something, and then we allow them to go. We don't say, wow, that team that put Iron Man together was so great, let's now use them to make the next, I don't know, Jane Austen movie, as an example. Because that particular team was the right team to do that particular thing. We increasingly are starting to think of work as being a way of interchanging skills and capabilities. And that if I am a leader of a team, then my role is to look at the skills and capabilities I need to deliver what I need to deliver. Not, is my team really good? Do I like all the people I work with? And also, do I care whether they're currently doing work for someone else at the moment? No. Do I care if they're doing work for a competitor? I might care, but I might also not care enough to stop them doing that. So we're seeing this idea of a portfolio of roles that people could carry around with them and work in my team. And as a leader, my job is to grab the best people with the best capabilities to build Iron Man 3. And if they're working on something else at the same time, that's fine. And at the end of this, I will then say, how many of these people do I need to do the next thing we need to deliver? And it might be all of them, it might be none of them. How do we create a world in which work is a bit more like that? One of the critical enablers of that is this idea of diversity. And diversity has moved beyond something that we do as an organisation because of our social charter. It's actually a key enabler or a critical enabler for innovation. If you have a group of people who look and think like you are not going to be able to innovate. Innovation actually arises out of points of creative tension. And points of creative tension arise when you get people who have very, very different experiences, views, beliefs, philosophies, backgrounds in a room. It doesn't happen when you get a whole lot of group of people who look like me. If I have people that look like me, we're going to basically develop products and services that satisfy people that look like me. If I want to satisfy more people, I need more people involved in that. So diversity becomes one of these really critical enablers for us. Anyone know what that symbol there is? I'll give you a clue. It's a logo for a company. That company is Freelancer. Freelancer are a combination of our first trend around platform and our second trend around a different way of doing work. And Freelancer have, I think it's about 4.5 million people around the world who basically say, I've got a whole lot of skills, and if people want work done, you go into freelancer.com and say, I would like a piece of work done. You give them a bit of a spec, they bid for the work. It's like Fiverr or Airtasker, things like that. As an example, I was doing a bit of an infographic I needed done. I'd had a quote for about $300 from a local company. I went into Freelancer and said, here's all the data, can you put it in a pretty infographic for me? Basically, it cost me $35, was done overnight by someone in Russia. So $300 versus $35.
Can I just say, with that diversification then of workforce, is that going to flow through to not policy, civil policy or credit then?
So, great question, great question. So it has to flow through to both. So, you know, there are really fundamental questions with both in terms of currency issues, in terms of taxation legislation, in terms of where is work done versus where is work paid for. So all of those things are part of a world of work which is increasingly global versus a legislative environment, and to some extent things like a currency environment that is very specific to countries. And we can talk a lot about cryptocurrencies, and we can talk about Bitcoin hitting $7,000 if you want to do that. But that idea of how currencies trade and things like that is the next evolution of this. This is where we're seeing the trend start. The idea here is to say, if this continues, how are we going to start to think about the implications for this politically, financially, and it has some huge implications. But Freelancer have actually started now saying, well, we will bid for large international projects based upon our ability to look at 4 million people and grab them together into their own purpose-built teams. So they've lifted the whole level of what they're able to do. And this really is all leading to this idea of a fluid workforce, a workforce that flows in and out of organisations, that allows us to rapidly scale and rapidly de-size when we need to. But it means that we need to think about how we source capability for ourselves, how we stop thinking about teams as being a solid state and start seeing them as being far more fluid in the way in which we work and gather those. So I'm going to give you another 2 minutes again. What are the threats and opportunities that arise out of a different way of working for you, for your clients, for the products you offer? Think about that. 2 minutes. Our last trend, a fairly obvious one, but if we're going to live longer, and if we're going to have to work a lot longer, what are we going to do when the robots take all our jobs? Yeah, that's right. You'll find out next session. In 1915, John Maynard Keynes predicted that his grandchildren would work no more than 15 hours a week. He said, based upon the way in which our productivity is increasing and based upon the way in which we're becoming so much more efficient at our jobs, people won't need to work more than 15 hours a week. He predicted that his grandkids would work on Mondays and Tuesdays and then have a 5-day weekend. Wouldn't that be nice? Now, if he'd predicted that we thought we would work 15-hour days, I could see that. 15-hour weeks, that's amazing. But there are now some things happening that are going to profoundly impact the way in which we work. I mean, these things have been coming for a while, but where we saw maybe 20 years ago computers coming in and we'd have a paperless office. I don't know if anyone here has the paperless office that we all dreamed about 20 years ago, but sure as hell isn't me. And then we would be impacted by the way in which we work. But there's some really interesting things happening. So the first one are these. So this is Google's autonomous vehicle. There are hundreds and hundreds of these driving around Northern California at the moment. They have no steering wheel. They occasionally have a technician driving in them, and they're currently logging hours. On top of them is that's both a camera and a radar. It scans around, and it also knows the position of every other automated vehicle, and it tracks lines on the side of the road. It can tell exactly what's happening at any point in time. It has sensors all the way around, underneath, everywhere, so it can drive by itself. Now, they occasionally have accidents, but the accidents are usually cost less to repair, and the accidents are invariably caused by interacting with cars where people are in them. See, if in a system where they're all automated, they don't crash. In a system when they work with human beings, that's when things go awry. DHL, who are an international courier company, currently are flying 747s around the world without pilots. They've been doing that for 2 years now. Hands up if you would happily get on a 747 and fly to the other side of the world on a plane without a pilot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. Hands up if you wouldn't do that. Okay. Of those people that wouldn't do that, of the number of commercial airline fatalities, can you tell me the percentage that you think are human error? It's not 100, but it's over 90%. So over 90% of airline accidents are created by human error. See, the robots don't need to be perfect. They just need to be better than us. It's true, they don't need to be perfect, they just need to be better than us. They need to be safer or quicker or more efficient. And that's starting to happen. You can talk about these things crashing and you can talk about other things, but they don't have to be perfect. They won't be. But they will be better than us. I'm going to jump to this one. I'll come back to that one in a second. Quill is a robot. It's really software, but that's the way we talk about robots these days, that writes newspaper articles. So Quill is in probably more than 50 newspapers across the United States at the moment, and this is how it works. Mostly in things like sports reporting or financial reporting, it watches a game in real time. It tracks how that game is progressing, it uses the statistics, and then creates a narrative that matches the way the game went. And the narrative is pre-programmed with language that you and I would understand. A game in two halves, a seesawing battle, a ding-dong struggle from the get-go. Whatever language you want to program into this story, Quill will write the article. It will be factually correct. It will have no grammatical errors, no spelling errors, and it will be on the desk of the sub-editor within seconds of the game finishing. And the sub-editor will just push publish. And it will go into the online version of that newspaper. That is happening today. How could that technology displace some of the things that we do? Could it write a statement of advice? Could it write a quote? Could it, what are the things that that sort of technology could do programmed correctly? The one in the middle is actually Alexa. Alexa is a piece of technology that sits in your house. Alexa's made by Amazon, but Google Home and Apple are about to bring one out if they haven't already. And it works with all the devices in your house that are Wi-Fi enabled. And you can get anything Wi-Fi enabled these days. And you can give it instructions, verbal instructions. You don't have to send it anything. You can say, Alexa, set the lounge room to cinema. And it will turn on the TV and it'll turn on all the different bits that you want turned off. Dim your lights. You can tell it, good night, Alexa, and it will turn off all the things that are connected to it. Go into Bunnings or anything like that, you can buy Wi-Fi enabled light globes for every light in your house. They can then be programmed to be controlled by Alexa. All this stuff is currently available. This isn't new. This is available now, and you can go and completely enable your house. You can get little sockets that plug into all your devices that sit between the PowerPoint and your device, and now it's Wi-Fi enabled. You can be turned on and off.
Is there a socket button in the light? She's obviously not here.
She is. And if you think I'm going to touch that one. So all this technology is available, and here's an interesting piece of work that was done. This work was now 2 years old, but it comes out of Harvard, where they did an assessment of the 9 different capabilities they think robotics will be able to do across the world of work. And then they looked at about 300 jobs and said how much of these 9 capabilities is involved in each of these jobs. And then they ranked the roles from those that we think are most likely to be done by robotics over the next 15 years, all the way through to those that we think have a less likelihood of being done by robotics. And at the top of the list is these things like telephone salespeople, typists, legal secretaries, finance account managers, routine inspectors, sales administrators, bookkeepers, payroll managers. It's also retail workers. So McDonald's currently has a number of restaurants where their whole drive-through in the US is done automatically. You don't have someone serve you. You put in what you want. You actually speak into the speaker to say what you want. It comes through. You pay for it, and then you keep going. No contact with a human being at all. At this end, sorry, I keep doing that. At this end of the spectrum are the soft skills. Things that robotics is not expected to be able to do. Psychologists, therapy professionals, speech and language therapists, education advisors, publican or manager of licensed premises. So if you're looking at, if you want to combine a couple of things, when you decide to do your retirement, buy a pub. Sounds like a good thing to do. Become a bush psychologist, buy a pub. Yep. And all of it seems to be leading here. So who in the room has a car that's probably less than 3 years old? Okay, most people in the room. Most of your cars will have some form of artificial intelligence in there to help you drive better. Whether that's lane departure warning, whether it's the blind spot monitoring, whether it's things in your engine that actually look at how quickly your engine is revving, whether it's the ABS. This is what we're calling the new frontier, which is this idea of augmentation. So rather than robotics replacing our roles, there's a lot of work at the moment which is looking at how will robotics and artificial intelligence augment the roles that we do by making us safer, faster, more efficient, more accurate, more effective at our roles. This one here on the lower right is actually a set of glasses. They're virtual reality glasses, which is a form of augmentation that allows someone in a stock area to look across. This is on a few acres, and they can actually put this on and they can see stock levels like a heads-up display for stock levels and everything. They can adjust the distance and the length so they can see up from a particular spot in this warehouse what they have in the warehouse without having to go and look. And this is the example of sort of this new frontier of augmentation as opposed to replacement of roles. You need my microphone and my clicker. I'll take that as a comment. So, look, we're just about out of time, but there's probably 1 or 2 minutes for any questions. But the things we've covered, these 4 trends, the first one is this idea of organisations moving from pipelines to platforms. The second one, which is really related to that, is the way in which work is going to be done and organisations are going to look is transforming to a far more fluid way of thinking about work. That work is going to go on for longer. Our lives are going to be longer and we're going to be expected to do many more different things. Surprisingly, if you are already at 50, most of the actuarial tables say that you have a better than 1 in 2 chance of now living to 90. Better than 1 in 2 chance of living to 90 if you're now 50. So if you are thinking that, you know, I wanted to do something different with my life, but it's too late, think again. You've got enough time to do something different. And lastly, we are going to increasingly see technology come in to do some of the things that we used to do. That's going to have an impact on work. It's going to have an impact on the sorts of work we do, but it's also going to have an impact on what the workforce will look like. The people who are in our workforce won't be the ones that were there 5 years ago. It will look very different. Any last minute questions? Well, it's a really good question. I think that we're stepping into there now what society needs to do. One of the things we know is that the early predictions on robotics would say that if it does the whole transportation industry, then we're looking at a minimum of 25% unemployment. At 25% unemployment, it doesn't matter how efficiently you produce goods or services, not enough people can buy them. So the risk we run with robotics and automation is creating this efficiency and creating products that can be done so beautifully and no one to buy them, and then the whole thing falls apart. So countries like Norway are a good example. So Norway has instituted a living wage where they have said that in order for our economy to keep rolling along, people must be able to buy things. For people to be able to buy things, they must have a certain amount of money to do that. The living wage is funded not by taxation, but by, well, it is taxation, but it's taxation on the robots. So those companies that are investing more in robotics and automation, where it's not flowing through to the owners of labour, are actually having to pay more into the coffers to actually prop up society. We're going to have to think about what that means. So the economy requires people to buy things. If people don't have jobs, they can't buy things. Doesn't matter how much you provide. So they're the things that we're going to have to look into as a society and as a government. Because
Is that closer or further away?
Sorry?
Is that close or further away?
So there are.
20 years or 10 years? Or?
It's closer than 10 years. Closer than 10 years. We are seriously going to have to think about the idea of, for an economy to be sustained, people have to be able to consume. What does that mean? If you put in a new piece of technology in whatever organisation and it means that 20% of your organisation is not going to have a job, there has to be a way of actually working through that through the system. So, interesting times. Thank you for your time. And I know whether you're going to artificial intelligence or going to business, but
Thanks so much, Stuart, for an enlightening presentation. I've seen a lot of futurist presentations in the last 12 months, but the conversation has certainly started to shift away from artificial intelligence taking over the world to, as Stuart put it, becoming an enabler or an augmenter to actually support us in the future. So once again, round of applause. Well done.